The deepest truths about human suffering rarely survive intact in official history. They do not live in textbooks or memorial plaques. They survive instead in omissions, in blacked-out paragraphs, in archives stamped classified and later returned empty. They survive in the tremor of witnesses whose memories were dismissed as madness, and in institutions built under the pretense of care but engineered for control. History repeatedly proves that the most dangerous weapon ever developed was not a bomb or a bullet, but the systematic experimentation on human beings carried out under the authority of science and government. These experiments did not begin with cruelty announced openly. They began quietly. They wore white coats. They spoke the language of progress, rehabilitation, national security. They unfolded behind locked doors, where consent was assumed irrelevant and suffering was reframed as data. One such place was St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. By the mid-20th century, St. Elizabeth stood as one of the largest psychiatric institutions in the United States. Officially, it was a sanctuary for the mentally ill. Unofficially, it became something else entirely. A controlled environment where human behavior could be dismantled, observed, and reconstructed. Many of its patients were war veterans shattered by combat trauma. Others were civilians abandoned by families unable or unwilling to care for them. Once inside, identity dissolved quickly. Names were replaced with numbers. Files grew thin, while voices grew thin. Doctors at St. Elizabeth's did not operate as healers, they operated as designers. Electroconvulsive therapy was administered not as treatment, but as endurance testing, with voltages and frequencies exceeding established safety limits. Chemical compounds, many experimental, some unnamed, were injected without explanation. Consent forms were either absent or meaningless. A phrase appears repeatedly in surviving staff testimonies: "Do not ask, only record." Orderlies whispered of Ward X, an area omitted from public maps of the hospital. Its windows were blacked out. Entry required clearance few possessed. Patients taken there were often injected with clear liquids at dawn. Some returned hours later shaking, mute, or unable to recognize their own names. Others never returned at all. Sleep deprivation was routine. Lights were left on continuously for days. Patients begged for rest. Eventually, resistance collapsed. Nurses recorded the moment of compliance with clinical detachment. Survivors later recalled entering a state where obedience felt automatic, thought felt distant, and memory felt dangerous. A 1954 memorandum, recovered partially decades later, states, "Trials to continue, patient resistance diminishing, retention of memory undesirable, obedience remains." The author's name was fully redacted. Former staff described patients who appeared emptied. They walked only when commanded. They ate mechanically. Some recited sequences of numbers without pause. Others hummed the same 3 notes endlessly, a monotone taught under continuous light and repetitive auditory cues. These behaviors were not symptoms, they were outcomes. Even the building itself betrayed the truth. During later renovations, construction crews discovered unlisted tunnels, reinforced walls, and sealed chambers resembling bunkers rather than hospital rooms. The architecture suggested containment, not care, control, not recovery. This pattern of deliberate cruelty was not isolated. In 1932, in Tuskegee, Alabama, government doctors recruited poor African-American men under the promise of free health care. They were told they had bad blood, a vague term masking the truth: syphilis. The intent was never to treat them. The intent was to observe the full progression of the disease until death. For nearly 40 years, even after penicillin became widely available, treatment was intentionally withheld. Doctors watched men go blind, insane, paralyzed. They documented organ failure. They recorded death timelines. When the study was exposed in 1972, 128 men were dead. Their wives were infected. Their children were born with congenital disease. The experiment had succeeded, scientifically. Morally, it collapsed civilization's claim to ethics. A similar violation occurred in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948. There, U.S. researchers deliberately infected approximately 1,500 people with syphilis and gonorrhea, including prisoners, soldiers, and mental health patients. Many were never treated. Most never understood what was done to them. Apologies came decades later. Accountability never did. The scale of human experimentation reached industrial levels during World War II. In Japanese-occupied Manchuria, Unit 731 operated as a biological and medical testing complex hidden from maps and protected by silence. Prisoners were referred to as maruta, logs. They were not patients, they were materials. Vivisections were performed without anesthesia to observe organ failure in real time. Subjects were injected with plague, cholera, anthrax. Frostbite experiments froze limbs solid, then thawed them using boiling water or open flame to study tissue decay and pain thresholds. Researchers meticulously recorded screams, convulsions, and time of death. At least 3,000 people died within Unit 731. After the war, many of its scientists received immunity from the United States in exchange for their data. Justice was traded for knowledge. At the same time, Nazi Germany turned concentration camps into laboratories. At Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück, doctors conducted experiments under the authority of the Reich. Hypothermia trials submerged prisoners in ice water until organs failed. High-altitude chambers simulated extreme pressure loss. Of 200 subjects, 80 died. Sterilization experiments exposed genitals to radiation or performed surgeries without anesthesia. Poisons were tested through food and injections. These crimes led directly to the Nuremberg Code, establishing informed consent as a foundation of medical ethics. But even that safeguard proved fragile. After the war, the battlefield shifted inward, from the body to the mind. In 1953, the CIA launched Project MKUltra, an illegal and covert program designed to explore mind control, interrogation, and behavioral manipulation. Hundreds of experiments were conducted on unwitting US and Canadian citizens. LSD was administered without consent. Sensory deprivation, isolation, electroshock and psychological tour were employed systematically. One of the most disturbing cases involved scientist Frank Olson, who was secretly dosed with LSD during a CIA retreat. 9 days later, he fell from a 13th floor hotel window in New York. His death was ruled a suicide. Decades later, evidence suggested otherwise. MKUltra also included Operation Midnight Climax, in which CIA-funded prostitutes lured men into safe houses where they were drugged and observed through one-way mirrors. Most MKUltra records were destroyed in 1973, leaving gaps so large they formed the outline of the crime itself. Entire populations were sometimes treated as test subjects. In 1950, the U.S. Navy sprayed Serratia marcensis bacteria over San Francisco to test biological dispersion. Hospitals flooded with patients. 11 became seriously ill. 1 elderly man died. The British government conducted similar experiments, releasing chemicals and microorganisms across the UK for decades. Prisoners, the poor, the mentally ill, those without power, were used repeatedly. At Holmesburg Prison, inmates were subjected to pharmaceutical tests because they were cheaper than chimpanzees. Even in the 1990s, ethical lines were crossed. HIV drug trials in Africa gave placebo treatments to pregnant women despite known effective therapies, resulting in thousands of preventable infant infections. What unites all these cases is not ignorance but intent. Records were destroyed, files arrived empty, graves were numbered, not named. Survivors were dismissed as unreliable, but silence too leaves evidence. The legacy of these experiments is not just trauma, it is a warning. When science divorces itself from humanity, when government shields cruelty by classification, progress becomes indistinguishable from atrocity. The story of St. Elizabeth's, Tuskegee, Unit 731, and MKUltra is not finished. It persists as a question humanity still struggles to answer. When power claims necessity and knowledge demands sacrifice, who decides whose suffering is acceptable, and how much truth must be erased to justify it?